the entrepreneurs, the you that are listening to this podcast right now, we think different, right? It's like there's something different. When we see a commercial, it's like we're already putting things together of like, oh, maybe they should have did this with the ad, or wow, that's a cool product. What if they did it this way? It's like, that's something that's creative, that's God-given inside of us. And those that put it aside and just put it on the shelf, that seed never gets planted. It never takes root.
Allan has started and grown several multi-million-dollar businesses. His mission is to help you do the same. Welcome to the Business Growth Pod, building the future one entrepreneur at a time.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Business Growth Pod. I'm Allan Draper. I'm your host. I'm excited for our episode today. Before we get into it, make sure that you hit that plus button or that subscribe button or the follow button, whatever it is on the platform that you listen to this podcast on. Make sure that you're getting notified when I drop episodes weekly. I have fantastic guests and you don't want to miss them. And today is no different. We have Rylee Meek with us today. He's the founder of the King's Council, which is a community designed to equip entrepreneurs with the tools, systems, and frameworks necessary to discover, develop, and deploy their God-given vision into the marketplace, which is what I'm all about. Welcome to the show, Rylee. Glad to have you.
Hey, Allan. Happy to be here, man. This is going to be fun.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your story, especially on the entrepreneur side. What got you interested in business, and tell me about what you're working on nowadays.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So I grew up in South Dakota, which, yes, that's still a state. It's a great place to be from. Not a whole lot going on there, even back, what am I? I'm 37 now. So back when I was younger, still 30 years ago, I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. So it wasn't like there was a whole lot going on, at least from an opportunity standpoint. And so when I was looking to first kind of make my first buck, I thought, well, I'm going to go get a job, right? Like that's just what people did. And the only job in that area was to make pizzas at our local gas station for minimum wage, man, which is a whopping $5.15 an hour back in the good old days. And I worked one 8-hour shift. I did the math in my head and I thought, there is no way I'm doing that again. And that's really what actually spurred my desire, or really just hunger, to dive into entrepreneurship. And I knew what I didn't want more so than what I did want. And that's what I really used as kind of just that motivation, or I don't even know if motivation is a word, maybe inspiration, because I didn't know what I didn't know at the time, but I knew what I didn't want. I saw a lot of fruit in people's life that I didn't want anything to do with. And so it was more about just like being intentional of seeking out mentors and coaches and just wisdom from people that I had to, travel great distances to be around. And, back in this would have been like, the late 90s, early 2000s, man. So it's not like I had a lot of podcasts to listen to or things like that. So I found myself driving up to Minneapolis, which is actually where I'm at now. One weekend every month, I would drive 5 hours one way to attend a success training seminar. And bro, that's like what rocked me. It blew my mind. It opened me or exposed me to just a new way of thinking, a way to actually understand that I could actually even think about what I'm thinking about, like, and understand that, I don't have to just go through this life or just with basically go to school, get a job, and work 40, 50 years and die, right? Like I wanted nothing to do with that. And it was so important for me to get around those like-minded people that really just helped to grow me in just who I am today. And so whether that's really just been a philosophy, man, that I've just really always lived by, it's that, hey, look for the other fruit in people's lives that I wanted and just do whatever it took to be around them. And sometimes it was paying money. Sometimes it was volunteering to get a seat at the table. Heck, sometimes I had to serve water at the table just to be around people that I could glean from in that process, man. And so at the age of 15, my first job was really my last. And then it's just been entrepreneurship for the last, 22 years now. It's hard to believe. I'm getting old, man.
That's awesome. So I was on this guy's podcast a week or so ago, and he wanted me to talk to his audience about building wealth. And I believe that there are a handful of money principles, laws that govern money and wealth. And that if you follow those laws, like, you'll be wealthy. It's really tough not to be. And he was trying to get me to talk about those a little bit. But the entire show, I talked about mentality, and I talked about mindset, and I talked about limiting beliefs, and I talked about paradigm shifts. And it probably like 2/3 of the way into the podcast, he's like, man, like, it's interesting that you're talking about these things. And I could tell that there was like this hint of, he was like kind of concerned. Like I wasn't talking about the right things. Very cool guy. I thought it was a great episode. But then I told him, I think it's a little bit like if you go to like an NFL, I used to go to preseason all the time, and I used to go to training camp, and I'd watch them play. And when I first went, I just figured they'd be playing like an actual like scrimmage or something the entire time. But what you actually see for 90+% of the time is you'll see the receivers in really small groups, and they'll have like dummies or cones or whatever on the ground. They'll run in like a little zigzag, pump their arms, and then stop. And, you know, the linemen, they'll like hit a sled and then stop. Like, and I'm like, what's going on here? Why are they doing these like weird little calisthenics, these weird little things? And what I realized is that years down the road, I realized they were engaged in something called deliberate practice. And it hit me that the concept was, you don't get better at playing football by playing football at the same speed that you will through deliberate practice. So it's these little tiny things that the athletes at the top level of performance were working on. And I realized in this moment during this podcast that what I was talking about with him was my form of deliberate practice. It was going through the mentality, feeling worthy to be wealthy, feeling like money is not necessarily evil in and of itself, getting rid of these self-doubts and these self-concerns. And in order to get to the principles of building wealth, you have to get rid of these limiting beliefs and change your mentality. Just like those receivers, in order to get into the game, they have to nail down that little zigzag, or that, you know, where they plant their right foot on that slant route or whatever it is. And that was what I was getting at. And I feel like when you said that you invested in these success courses, that's exactly what it was. And a lot of times, Rylee, people are like, no, Allan, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to hear about mentality. I don't want to hear about positive affirmations. I don't want to hear about reading books. I don't want to hear about improving myself. I don't want to hear about self-development, mentorship, coaches. I don't want to hear about self-development. I just want you to tell me the trick. And I'm like, that is the trick. That's what separates the people that are wealthy, the people that are professionally successful, the people that are successful in their homes, they're successful physically, they're successful in their spiritual life. They get their head right first. They get people in their lives that they're like, okay, like, man, I can accomplish anything. And it changes a lot for people. And so is that kind of your experience? You mentioned that right off the bat, right? How you invested in this success course, this success training. Is that kind of the experience of finding somebody that you can listen to that can either coach you or you can mentor you or you can learn from? Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
Yeah, absolutely, man. There's study after study that just proves that, you know, the sum total of the 5 people you hang around with, this is the reality of the situation. And to your point, man, it's like so many people, they want to shine the championship trophy, even though they're not willing to run the rep and put in the work to actually get it. And so, especially now, it's just like, it just doesn't seem like the work ethic is there. And I mean, I've experienced this with my own companies, but even just when we're coaching others as well, it's like from that hiring and training process of, you got to put in the work. It just seems like it's something that when you find it in somebody, it's so fun. I'm sure you've experienced this, man, when you're coaching people or even consulting, you just give them the playbook. And when they run the plays and then they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it worked. It's like, yeah, but it's not that I'm great or you're great, right? It's like you operated within those principles that you're talking about and they do work every single time. And I think as an entrepreneur, you know, one of the things that I've learned is a lot of people will tell you like, hey, follow your passion. You'll never work a day in your life. And I'm like, I think that's complete BS because I know a lot of passionate people one of my business partners, his wife is very passionate about rocking babies. You're going to go broke real quick being passionate about that. So as an entrepreneur, what I realized or understood was that I had a certain level of passion within me. And what I needed to do was look for opportunities, but always bring my passion with me. And then operating within those principles that you mentioned, man, what makes entrepreneurship so special is getting into alignment with those laws or those principles that you've talked about, but also much like an airplane, the law of gravity is still in place for an airplane. An airplane isn't bound by that law, but it supersedes it. And it operates within those principles for the purpose of why it was created, right? And so if you can get in alignment with, first off, why you were created, and ultimately seek that number one, and then get in alignment with those principles, the opportunities are going to come. Be very, very passionate. Now it's just simply head on a swivel, look for those opportunities. Who did I hear this? Jesse Itzler, I think, said, it was like, hey, opportunities, they're a lot like the bus, right? It's like there's another one coming every single time, every hour on the hour. You just got to decide which one you're going to get on, right? And so if as an entrepreneur, a business owner, whatever that is, if it's you're looking to start a business right now, or you're in a season where it's like, okay, cool, this has been a cool opportunity, I can exit now. What's the next opportunity? That's what is so fun since I've been doing since the age of 15, man, I've done a lot of different things, a lot of different industries, but at the core of everything that I've done, it's really been focused on client acquisition. And the reason for that, Allan, is because you can have a great product, you can have a great service, but if you build it, they do not come. I don't care what that movie has ever told us. You have to have a consistent flow of leads and sales into your business. Otherwise, you got a hobby, right? And sometimes a very expensive one. So where business begins and ends, in my opinion, is, do we have sales? Are you providing value? And there's one thing to have value, but can you get somebody to pay you, exchange dollars for that value that you've been given? Then you're in business. Now we can put some structure in place in order to really grow and ultimately scale this thing. And as I mentioned, man, that's literally what I've been doing since the age of 15. The product's kind of been irrelevant. It's more of, hey, what's going on in the marketplace? And is there an opportunity here? Can I package this thing up in a way that people will want? Because there's not a whole lot new under the sun, man. It's like, unless you're inventing like a new app or something along those lines, there's business for the most part is taking it probably an already somewhat of an idea and making it a little bit better, maybe packaging a little bit differently, and then providing it to the marketplace.
Let's talk a little bit about the mindset of an entrepreneur. What do you see as the biggest difference between the mindset of an entrepreneur and the mindset of an employee? And specifically speaking to those that are trying to decide if entrepreneurship or starting a business is right for them.
Yes. Okay. So I really truly believe that we are all born entrepreneurs. And over time, especially over the last 150 years or so, we have been trained how to be employees. And there's nothing wrong. I'm not taking a shot at employees or anything like that. I have employees. I love employees. But all of our employees have an entrepreneur mindset. Okay, so my definition of an entrepreneur, the root word of it is, it's a French word, entreprendre. I don't speak much French other than the 4-letter words, but the root word of entreprendre means to undertake. I really believe as an entrepreneur, we've just kind of accustomed to like, hey, it's a business owner, or, you know, somebody that's building a company, or is a C-suite executive, whatever that is. That's not my definition of an entrepreneur. You could be a stay-at-home dad or mom. You could be a lemonade stand host. You could be a mechanic, whatever. If you're willing to undertake the task at hand, you're an entrepreneur. And this is why I believe we're born that way. If you go all the way back, so the King's Council, we're a faith-based coaching company. Everything we coach on is backed by biblical principles. So all the way back in the book of Genesis, the first thing, though, that God actually revealed about himself, it says, in the beginning, God created. And then it goes on and it tells us that we were created in his image. An image isn't necessarily that we were created to look like him, but we were created with the characteristics of the original creator. And that's why I really believe and know deep down inside all of us, there's that creative person, that creative seed of greatness inside all of us. And so what the trouble with it is, and really why I call it a seed, is the sole determinant of if any seed is ever going to take root. If I have that seed and I'm just throwing it on pavement, it ain't ever going to take root, right? Like I've got to put that seed in the soil. I've got to water it, fertilize it. And this comes back to what we were talking about previously, is like, who are you surrounding yourself with? What podcast are you listening to? What books are you reading? What content are you getting into your brain, your mindset, to ultimately allow that seed of greatness to take root? If you're not feeding it what it needs, it'll never take root. We can live this life, which happens, unfortunately, for the majority of people, is that we just go through this life based upon what we've been taught, what we've been told, dare I say, indoctrinated to believe what this life is about. And it ain't about going to high school, going to college, getting a good job, and working 40, 50 years to retire. Back, I mentioned before, I read a lot of the Word of God, and I've never seen any version of retirement in the Bible. I've never seen any version of this thought process that we're living now. But I understand why we've accepted it. The Industrial Revolution, man, needed employees. They didn't want entrepreneurs. They didn't want people that were thinking for themselves and creating new, better, bigger ideas. They wanted people that were going to show up when they wanted them to assemble what they needed them to do, to follow directions. When the bell rang, they did their job. When it rang again, they had their lunch break. And so what happened was the traditional school system as we know it today was created. Well, I do know this stat. In 1913, 3% of people in America were employees in 1913. So 97% were actually entrepreneurs. It's 2022 now, and that is completely inversed. It's 3% entrepreneurs and 97% are employees. And at that same time, I think it was 1907 is where I saw this textbook where essentially it was teaching basically entrepreneurship up until the 7th grade. And at that point, you go started a business, whether you became a blacksmith or a farmer, like you just did what you had to do to make ends meet for your family. And eventually that was taught out of us. And you can go from, think of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, how culture, how society has created this mindset that majority of Americans have today, which is what we've bought into and people are believing it. But this is what so excites me, Allan, is that the few that have bought into this, the entrepreneurs, the you that are listening to this podcast right now, we think different, right? It's like there's something different. When we see a commercial, it's like we're already putting things together of like, oh, maybe they should have did this with the ad, or wow, that's a cool product. What if they did it this way? It's like, that's something that's creative, that's God-given inside of us. And those that put it aside and just put it on the shelf, that seed never gets planted. It never takes root.
You know, what's interesting is that you use this word like indoctrinated. And, you know, like when I hear somebody say, usually to a child or, you know, to somebody that they're older than, hey, go to school, go to college, get a good job with benefits, and look forward to retirement. Dude, that's nails on the chalkboard for me. But that's exactly what and I have a law degree. I don't know what percentile in terms of education that puts me, but I have a Juris Doctorate degree. So I did my fair share in the college system. But I always say, if my kids say, hey, Dad, I'm thinking about going to college, unless they have like some specific reasons, like, hey, I want to be a veterinarian. One of the biggest problems though, Rylee, they're not going to know what it's like to be a veterinarian when they're in high school or even college. I didn't know what it was like to be a lawyer until I started working for a law firm. And by then it was like too late. And look at what I'm doing now. I do own a law firm, but I don't practice law anymore. But the point is this, is that what was pounded into our head these, over 100 years since 1913 or whatever you said, it was go to school, go to college. And a lot of us have parents where, for my mom, it was a badge of honor. Yeah, like I have a son that graduated from college. He got a bachelor's degree. or he went to law school, right? And it's like talking about marketing and business, colleges and universities are some of the best, because now it's like, oh, wait, you're not going to college? That's weird. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you going to college? College is right for some people. I do want, like, some people, like, that is their best option, but it's a lot fewer. That percentage is a lot lower than the folks that are actually going. Now it's an expectation. But think about that from a business model, from a business perspective. If you own a college, right? There are some private colleges, and even the universities, the public universities, they are printing cash. So it's this indoctrination. So for the entrepreneurs out there, like, don't think that you have this golden path that you have to follow. There's no such thing. Entrepreneurs, we're risk takers. We have the parts for the airplane. We're jumping off the cliff and trying to figure out how to assemble it on the way down. That's in our nature, right? This creative nature that you were talking about, that is so important to who I am as an entrepreneur. I look at the prophets, right? In the scriptures, every single one of them built something. They built a civilization, or they built a boat, or they built, buildings and temples, and what they were all building something. And for me, that's when where I doubled down on being an entrepreneur, was it's like, what? I do think a little differently. And I'm not trying to cram anybody into, this entrepreneurial box if they don't want to be in there. But what I am saying, Rylee, is don't let society and the status quo and this indoctrination cram you into this, hey, you have to go spend 8 years in college or whatever, at least 4, go get a good job and look forward to retirement. I am going to dread the day I retire, and I'm going to work until I'm not going to stop, because it's part of who I am. So for me, it's not one of these things that I think we're getting indoctrinated into right now is jobs suck. You work for the man, like, you look forward to retirement. What a terrible way to live. Yeah, hey, I'm going to work for 40 plus years. And the only reason I'm doing that is so that I can have a nice retirement or whatever.
Yeah, man, absolutely. That is just not, certainly, it does come back to the mindset of, like, back to, again, entrepreneurship. You can have an hourly paying job and you could be happy as can be, right? But it's probably because you have that entrepreneur mindset of that, hey, I'm serving my purpose in my season. And, you have a great culture, a great environment within the company that you're working in. So it's not a shot on that at all, but it is just having that idea of that we're doing something together. We're creating something together, knowing, and everybody understands, like, what the full vision is of the organization and the company. And that comes back all to vision, and then ultimately the culture that is created within the organization or the atmosphere of the business that you're working in. So
no, 100%. I always say that the best employees are the ones that their leader, whether it's the owner or some other type of upper level management, they show them the vision and give them the tools that they need to make it happen. No micromanaging. You get people bought in this creation process, right? I love when I look at one of my companies and we're doing really well, and I'm like, oh, wow, like, that doesn't look like my company anymore. It doesn't look like my company. It looks like their company. And so for those, not that I have a lot of people listening that are looking for a 9-to-5, but those that are currently in one, a great way to know if you're stuck is, when was the last time that you were able to put your thumbprint on a project? When was the last time you were able to participate in this idea of creating something without being told, how to do it, right? The leader says, hey, this is the vision. This is what we're trying to accomplish as, these broad range goals as a company, but the individual needs to decide how it's done.
Yes, absolutely. That comes from the head down, just the leadership. And that's the difference between a boss and a leader. And ultimately, unfortunately, a lot of large companies are they're manufacturing employees because they don't want them to think that way or have a say in what they're doing, which is unfortunate, right? But hey, that just leaves more room for us, more room for the entrepreneurs listening to this. Like, hey, how do we best serve and how do we best bring value to the marketplace? And then, hey, get paid very well doing so, right? We should get paid handsomely for the crap that we put up with being entrepreneurs.
Yeah, 100%. Well, as we're wrapping up here, Rylee, tell me about the King's Council. Tell me what you guys are up to and how you guys can help entrepreneurs.
Yeah, thanks, man. So the King's Council, this has really been I would say somewhat of a passion project that I've had, because you heard me talk about, hey, look for opportunities and bring your passion with you. Over the last decade, man, I've started 8 companies. Every single one of those, from zero to startup, we hit 8 figures within the very first year of each. So we've done well financially, which has been great. But even for those listening, if you've done well financially, you know quickly it ain't always about the money, right? But when you don't have enough of it, it's always about the money, right? And this is where I think that it's an interesting concept, because I mean, financially from the outside looking in, people would say, oh, it must be nice. You know, you hear things like that. And little did they know that I was just like the greatest feeling of unfulfillment in my life. It'd never been greater than about 3.5 years ago, after producing a lot of money. Right. And it was like, what am I going to do next? You know, I'm 33 at the time. And it's just like, what is this? What life is about? Just starting another business. And it's, you know, the excitement wasn't there for me. And I really thought back to like, God, what did you put me on this earth for? Because I realized you could be successful at a lot of things and still feel like a failure if you're not operating for the God-given intended purpose of why you were created. And this is why I mentioned this earlier. I hit on this so much because, for example, I have my home gym here and I have a treadmill in there, and it is an incredibly successful clothes hanger, right? But it's not operating.
You don't look like the cardio type.
I'm definitely not the cardio type, man. There's a lot of dust on that bad boy. If you're ruling it by that, it's like it would be a very successful clothes hanger. But in reality, it's a failure because it's not operating for why the manufacturer made that thing, right? And no different than us. Like, I really believe we are made to create, and vocationally what we decide to do, I think, is not as important as ultimately who we're becoming in the process. And this is why I look for opportunities and have done a lot of different things, still have multiple companies that afford me the ability to do what we're doing with the King's Council. And that essentially is, like, as I mentioned, we're a faith-based community. I actually made this thing into a nonprofit a few months ago, really because I wanted to get this out there to everybody. So we do weekly growth calls, we call them. It's a free community to be a part of, in which I just want to create a fun environment, a culture, an environment for entrepreneurs, but kingdom minded, as I mentioned, faith-based entrepreneurs, because I really feel, unfortunately, in the Christian community that at least that I was a part of and kind of grew up in, we're different from an entrepreneurship standpoint. I realized that when I raised my hand and said, hey, is there anybody else that's feeling this? In particular, through March of 2020 is when a lot of this really started to click for me. And I thought, man, I got to be a part of the solution, right? There's got to be something that I can do. And immediately I thought, who am I? Like, I'm just a guy. But as quick as I had that feeling, I felt God say, if not you, then who? And so at that point, it was a matter of just raising my hand and saying, hey, is anybody else feeling this way, that loves God, loves Jesus, but also wants to crush business and wants to, and not be ashamed about creating wealth, because it's God that gives us that ability to create it. And ultimately it's like, there's a lot of people out there that are like that, I found. And it's been amazing growing this community. So we have just the free community side. And then we have what we call the upper room, which is our, for profit. We're making money, as every business should, we're providing tremendous value, where we create this, we do monthly masterminds. We do one-on-one coaching, but it's not just about business and strategy. Yes, that's a component of it. Truthfully, Allan, I got no desire to help somebody go make $1 million if they're going to put it up their nose, because that's what I did, man. Early on, it's like money only makes you more of who you already are. And when I started to make a lot of it, I realized I was not that great of a dude. It was a great magnifier. Right. And money, it's all it is a tool, right? It's whatever we attach to it. It's a tool for, are we going to use it for good? Or are we going to use it for bad? And ultimately, the majority of what we coach on, yes, it's business and strategy, but also stewardship. And how do we put ourselves in a position to ultimately serve God and make money serve us? And that's really what our community of the King's Council is about. So we do weekly Zoom calls like this. We do our monthly get-togethers in person all over the country. It's just been really fun, man, to grow this community of like-mindseted, not like-minded, because it's not great to have everybody that thinks the exact same. That's not iron sharpening iron, but we are all growth mindseted in the fact that whatever we do, we're going to operate in excellence in whatever we put our hand to. And ultimately, we're going to get paid well to do it. And then what we do with that from there is up to us, right? And so that's just the community and the organization that we've put together here within the King's Council.
Love it, man. Where can people reach out to you to find out more about the King's Council and everything else you guys got going?
Yeah, man. So the best place, we're on all the socials and things, but if you're listening to the podcast, I have the King's Council podcast. Every week I'm on there, and so a lot of them are just solo episodes, but I do have guests on every now and then. And so it's fun. We just talk about entrepreneurship, but what it's like being a kingdom entrepreneur. And so that's probably the best place, man. kingscouncilcommunity.org has all of our list of event and calendar out for the whole rest of the year.
Love it. It's been a pleasure, man. Appreciate you. Keep up the great work. Keep fighting the good fight, and best of luck in the future, my man.
Thanks, Allan.
If you have enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a rating. And for daily inspiration and business tips, follow Allan on Instagram. Until next time, remember, we build the future one entrepreneur at a time.